Very, very happy and pleased to present our speaker tonight, Dr. Leila Vignal. Dr. Leila Vignal is Associate Professor in Human Geography at the University of Rennes 2, or Rennes 2 if you prefer, in France. She has been working on cities, globalization, and the transnational dynamics in the Middle East. Since 2011, she has also extensively worked on Syria, the transformation in Syria and of its society through war. In 2017, she edited a very interesting book called The Transnational Middle East, People, Places, Borders. In that book, she has also co-authored 2 chapters, one on transforming geographies of the Middle East, and another one on the direct investment of Gulf states in the Middle East and how that changes the region, reshapes the region in a way. She has published widely on the topics of her expertise, including a recent contribution to the Oxford Handbook of Sociology of the Middle East. Her chapter is on globalization and cosmopolitanism in the Middle Eastern city. A very interesting article that I would like to stress here is an article she wrote in International Affairs in 2017 called The Changing Borders and Borderlands of Syria in a Time of Conflict. And she has many other book contributions, articles, partly in French, partly in English, which I think are really, really interesting. So tonight, Dr. Vignal will talk about her forthcoming book, which is called War-Torn, The Unmaking of Syria, 2011-2021. Thank you, Leila, for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rafaela, for your kind words. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. I would, of course, prefer to be with you in person, but it's a wonderful occasion to share with you my most recent research, and this book that is still unpublished, but that will be published this summer. And so I don't know how familiar you are with Syria, but we thought with Rafaela that we are nearing the 10th birthday anniversary of the Syrian uprising. And so it makes sense also to go back a little bit to this conflict that has had a massive impact, of course, on Syria, but on the Middle East and on the world and on Europe more widely, because Europe, of course, has been the recipient of 1 million Syrian refugees, and the Syrian border has very much become one of Europe's borders. In a sense. So tonight, I'm not going to sum up my book. Obviously, it would be too wide a task. You have the presentation of the table of the book on this slide with the different chapters. What I was not sure about how to frame this seminar, but I decided to make a kind of general talk along the argument of my book, and just showing you quite briefly and within 30 minutes, as far as I understood, how my demonstration, how I apply my hypothesis and my argument to Syria. So the starting point of the book, it is the blurb of my book that you may have seen. When we talk about Syria today, it is of course impossible to refer any longer to the Syria as we once knew it. But actually, what struck me in the courses of the years is that it was very much the case actually that especially in the political arena there was and also in the academic field there was no reflection about what has changed in Syria and how Syria has been changed. And following this line of questioning, and based on my background as a human geographer and specialist of Middle Eastern cities, I got interested in the patterns, if you want, the patterns of violence, and the fact that in Syria, as in many other conflicts, of course, but I apply my inquiry to Syria. In Syria, it is not a random destruction, and so I started to try to understand how Syria was destroyed. Syria, its material environment, its infrastructures, its cities, but also how its population was affected. And actually, I soon realized, studying different episodes of violence in Syria and the way the conflict, the violent conflicts unfolded, I realized that, of course, this is my conclusion, that the unmaking of Syria, of its territorial fabric, and the displacement and the scope of the displacement of the Syrian population could not be attributed to a kind of collateral damage, something that is sad, but that happens in all wars. When you see the scope of the destruction, the scope of the displacement, we are talking about of more than half of the Syrian population that is currently displaced either within or outside Syria. And if you add to this people who at some point during the conflict have been displaced, but then could come back, because some of them could come back within Syria, it means that possibly 2/3 of the population experienced displacement at some point. So at this level of magnitude, you cannot just talk about, collateral damage. There is a fight, people move out, and then they come back. So so I was intrigued, and I wanted to understand the unmaking of Syria and the role, the place of destruction and displacement in the economy of violence, if you want, in Syria. So this is really my my line of inquiry. So this book is not assessing only what has been destroyed, although there is a documentary side of it, because I'm documenting of transformation, geographical, social transformation that has happened, but that is still not very much documented. So, of course, my book is documenting this aspect, what has been destroyed, but my intellectual pursuit, if you want, is very much focusing on how it has been destroyed, and how, and this informs us also about the nature of the conflict. And maybe possibly about, it can give us some lines of thoughts, or illuminating a little bit the future also of the country. So I also address in this book the fact that war is, of course, a powerful process of human and material destruction, obviously, but it is also a powerful process of spatial, social, and economic reconfiguration. And so I'm very much interested in this aspect in this book, showing that it's not about, resilience and saying that, war is, there is reconfiguration, there is transformation, and that's all fine. Of course, I'm not at all undermining the destruction aspect, but I am also interested in looking how, what comes out from a destruction at different geographical scales, as a local scale, really, the neighborhood, the city, the region, at the national scale, but also at the regional scale, because war does not stop at the border. Not only the borders of Syria are transformed by new practices emerging from the war, they are made much more porous. There are different actors that manage them, but also now, since 2018, many sections of the borders are actually in kind of limbos, because they are managed by external actors. There is foreign occupation. As you may know, the Turks are in the north of Syria, and the Lebanese Hezbollah actually is really the master of the Lebanese Syrian border. So, and also the fact that war does not stop at the border, and this connects to my previous research that Rafaela talked about, this book, and that was a collective research program on the transnational Middle East, is that with the war, actually, I argue in chapter 8, I think, that Syria has become transnationalized. It means that the disruption brought by the war within the Middle Eastern region has led to new economic routes, economic reconfigurations, because Syria was really at the heart of the trade routes of the Middle East, but also the deployment of a diaspora of refugees that is very much anchored in the region. There is 1 million refugees in the EU, but most of the refugees are in the region. It also transformed completely the Middle East, and this is a feature that is possibly there to endure because the Al-Assad regime has no intention whatsoever to have those refugees coming back to the country. So I'm interested, as I said, in destruction as a dimension of the political violence, as an instrument, also as a weapon in order to win the war, the destruction and displacement. And I will go back to these 2 points in a few minutes. And I'm also interested in war as a process of spatial, social, economic reconfiguration at all geographical scales. So this is, I've already talked a lot, and it's only my first slide, so I need to go a little bit more quickly. Rafaela, I have 30 or 40 minutes?
35.
Rafaela, do I have
Let's say 35.
35, and how much did I? Okay, I still have then 25 minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
Just for, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Right. So I'm going to, so it's going to be a bit, so it's a large view. Just going back a little bit to the conflict and to its chronology, because you may not all be familiar with it. There are 3 main phases that can be distinguished in the Syrian conflict. So the revolutionary phase that started in March 2011, 10 years ago, the phase of the revolution of the dignity, as it has been called. Then really the period of the unfolding of the war, once the opposition starts to be militarized, not all the opposition, but large sections of the opposition. And this is really a phase of internal conflict combined between the regime and the different opposition forces, and the plural is really important. So this phase of internal conflict is combined with external military intervention on the side of the regime, because as you know, Iran and Russia and the Lebanese Hezbollah and other militias that are organized by Iran are directly intervening in Syria. And this phase of internal conflict is also characterized by increasing divisions and rivalries among opposition groups. And of course, the emergence and the formation of jihadist groups, including the famous Islamic Islamic State group, but not only this one. And there is a third phase that started more or less in 2017 up to today, that saw the progressive recapture of most of the territory held by the opposition by alliance of Damascus, Moscow, and Tehran. Of course, these three phases, so they offer a general framework for the conflict in the 20 inclusive, because they may overlap in time, and as well as they may overlap in space, because there are not instance, at the time of speaking, there are still anti-regime demonstrations that are taking place in Syria, although in very limited numbers, while at the same time there is mostly in the north of the country, and in particular in the region of Idlib, where the population continue to be bombed. So to underline the fact that this chronological framework is useful, but it's not exactly set. It has those overlaps in spaces. So I'm going very quickly. So there is this phase of a revolution, of peaceful revolution. I'm sure that you have all memories of it. Just this map to show you, it's a map in French, but to show you the spread of the movement of uprising. It really covered the whole country, although with different chronologies, and it was massive. You've got this picture of the most important demonstration in Hama in July 2012 that gathered 500,000 people. So the spread of the movement across the revolution that has immediately been met by repression, and so the map that shows you, numbers of deaths since really from the start of the revolution. So immediately the regime replied to this movement of uprising by repression, and that led also to the militarization of the opposition, and we enter this phase of the unfolding of the war. And the regime has been very clear since the beginning. Rami Makhlouf, who is the most powerful businessman in Syria, and who was certainly at the time, said in May 2011, "We will fight till the end." And this is echoed by Bashar al-Assad a few years later. "We will liberate every inch of Syria." And so there is a clear, for the regime, there is no way that any kind of negotiation can take place. It is so there the strategy of repression and of violence is the strategy of the regime. But the regime, through the years, the regime grew more and more dependent on the financial and military support of its Russian and Iranian allies. And so, as I said, this support has translated into the direct intervention of the Iranian Pasdaran Corps, as well as Iran-backed foreign militias, many of them, I'm not quoting all of them here, of course, of the Lebanese Hezbollah, and of course of Russia, that provided support at the UN Security Council with its veto, but then intervened directly after supporting the regime with armament, etc. But then intervened directly in Syria from September 2015 onwards. So with involving its its aviation into the conflict. And it is because of Russia's air campaign that the recapture of the territory from 2016, 2017 onwards has been possible. And on the other side, on the other side of the conflict, among the other actors of the conflict, the armed opposition received support, but very little support, and support that cannot be compared to this direct involvement that benefited the Al-Assad regime. So it received, the opposition groups received financial and military support, but really in limited numbers. So in this, with the development of the conflict and the progressive, here you've got maps of the progressive recapture of Syria from, you've seen probably those maps in the papers, etc. A very fragmented Syria. It's a map of 2016, the map on the left-hand side of your screen, and on the right-hand side, you've got a map of the situation in 2020. So you see this progressive recapture by the regime forces that are in light gray here. But I'm sorry, I'm trying to go a bit fast on this aspect that is more known. To attract your attention, that to focus more on the strategy that is really at the heart of the dynamics of violence in Syria, because during the first phase of the unfolding of the war from 2012 until the intervention of Russia, actually the Syrian regime and the Syrian forces faced a military backlash, and so as you saw on the previous map, large portions of the national territory were no longer under its control. And an additional difficulty for the regime is that it had to fight on many fronts simultaneously. And it had then to cope also with what Bashar al-Assad himself described in 2015 as a growing lack of human resources, because the Syrian army had its own limitations in terms of men that it could enroll and men that could fight. So the strategy and so the situation of backlash and of depleting human resources really triggered the Russian direct intervention. Russia intervened in order to save the regime. But during all those years, actually, because of this difficulty, this strategic difficulty of having so many fronts to fight on and to have limited human resource, human capacity, the regime mobilized mass violence against the population in order to try to control the war and not to lose too much ground and to regain ground. And one of the strong points, if I may say, of the regime was that it had an exclusive access to air power, because the opposition had and still does not have any aviation or helicopters, and the opposition never had anti-air missiles. I don't know if this is a technical term, certainly in English. And so the regime used its advantage to be able to bomb the country in order not to lose too much ground, and in order to win the war with its this strategic advantage. And in order so this translated into an indiscriminate violence against the population, using its aviation capacity and the aviation capacity of Russia from 2015 onwards, but all using conventional weapons and all the range of conventional weapons, but also using unconventional weapons. And you've all heard, of course, of the use of chemical arms. But one of the most employed unconventional weapon of the war are those barrel bombs.
We have a problem with audio at the moment.
Excuse me, there is someone, I can hear someone. And so what I show in my book, through my research, what I focus an important part of my research on is the geography of destruction in Syria. And of the geography of destructions and the geography of the strategy of destruction has been applied to the territories the regime had lost, and so it has really targeted those neighborhoods, ignoring the humanitarian international law, because you may know that the international humanitarian forbids the targeting of civilian populations. If you target in a conflict, you are allowed to target a place in a residential neighborhood, but it has to be a very precisely defined point where you are sure that you've got a military target, and you have to make sure that the population around has had enough time to leave, etc. So if you targeting residential neighborhoods amounts to a war crime, and this is very much embedded into the international humanitarian Second World War. I cannot enter too much into too much details tonight, but this map of Aleppo indicates so the areas, of course, that are, you can see clearly the areas that are destroyed. You see the front line of Aleppo that has been divided into two areas, eastern Aleppo with opposition and remain under the control of government forces, and you can see clearly that it's all the areas that have been held by the opposition that suffered most of the damage. And you can see that the front line has moved, so this explains why you've got destruction on both sides of the front lines that I drew on this map, but it's just because the front line moved, of course, over the years. So it's really the ordinary population and cities that suffered from the violence of the conflict, and of course, ordinary populations and cities in areas oppositions, such as the neighborhood of Khaldiye in Homs, or the city of Daraya, which is in the suburbs of Damascus. there are other types of violence that have been applied to the population. For instance, the besieging of cities or neighborhoods. So at its highest, because now there are the besieging, there are just only a few remaining sieges, but at its highest, it's estimated. So it depends on the sources. So I listed all the different sources, but the estimates are that in 2015, 2016, there were between 1 to 1.5 and maybe 2 million people that in the I think there were 39 sieges, yes, and enforced by regime forces, governmental forces. Here, a very famous picture of the population of Yarmouk, which left hand of and of until the spring of 2016, and so its population, so it was home to 160,000 inhabitants. People, as soon as they had a chance, they would flee the neighborhood, and the other weapons of instruments of put in place mostly by the regime is the repression carried out by security services, and in particular arrests and enforced disappearances. So there is more than 100,000 disappearances in the jails of the Syrian government. And so this contributes also to the violence against the population and to the scope of the disruption for the population, and including its displacement. So this there is a Syrian NGO who tries to evaluate the of violence against the population, and so you see in these figures that clearly the regime forces, although there are nobody, everybody, all parties to the conflict have blood on their hands, indeed, but you can see that the general asymmetry of the responsibility. And this is very much in line with what I showed you, with the fact that it is a regime that had this the capacity to destroy the country and to weaponize the population in order to win the war through different means. So the question of the asymmetry of the parties and the means and the way that different parties fought the war is very important to understand how this country has been destroyed. And so now that I've showed you this strategy, very briefly, this strategy against the population of the opposition-held areas, you may understand more the massivity, the scope of the figures that I mentioned at the start of my talk, the fact that there is a massive internal displacement throughout Syria. So more there since 2015, there is a permanent stock of 6.5 million people displaced. So it means that in terms of flux, more people than that have been affected by internal displacement. the Syrian refugee crisis, as it is called, but you may not forget that in Europe in 2014-2015 is really a dwarf compared to the experience of the region, who are the country that are the places where the Syrian refugees are mostly to be found. And this is a classic of forced displacement. The refugees generally stay nearby. It's extremely costly. Many different operations to live further down the road, and people. So most in conflict generally remains nearby, and so it is the case also in the Syrian conflict. So it is estimated that there are 8. It's the people that are registered with the UNHCR, the UN agencies that looks after refugees, but there are a lot of my own estimates, together with other experts, is that one has to, it's more likely that there are 7 to 8 million Syrians. So the population 11 was of 21 million inhabitants. So it is 2/3 of the population, inside, outside, that has been displaced. Can you hear me?
Yes, but we don't. I don't see you though.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm really sorry. I don't know my Zoom. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, my Zoom disconnected. So anyway, I will have to fold soon this presentation. So just maybe because I see that I am also already running time. So on what could I? So first, I would like to share with you a few thoughts on peace. Of course, we are at the Syrian conflict. You know, obviously, the Syrian regime has won the military and political winner currently of the conflict, and the regime pushes for narratives of normalization, but the structures of the regime, of the Syrian state, are completely dysfunctional, and the economy is devastated, and the population, as you saw, is displaced either inside or outside the country. And you know, although the regime is the military winner, actually its internal supporters have been reduced to the bare bones, so one has to be extremely careful when one talk about the victory of the regime, because it is really now limited to a few really a limited number of supporters, and it's the maintaining of Bashar al-Assad to the presidency of the country is very much relies very much into the hands of Iran, and most importantly of Russia. So this also the situation of so we just to say that we are extremely far from a post-conflict situation. So one has to be careful. I mean, the Syrian situation is an interesting case to reflect about what defines peace. And so I would follow on this aspect what the sociologist Johan Galtung once suggested when he differentiated between a negative peace, which is the absence of direct violence, to a desirable peace resulting from a dynamic social construct. And writing a positive peace, as Galtung would said, is really nowhere to be seen in Syria. The Al-Assad regime, thanks to the support of its allies, has neither any interest nor will to engage in any kind of political settlement, nor has it ever wished or tried for such in the course of the conflict. And this ties very much in the work on civil wars of political scientists Adam Bagzo and Gilles Doronzoro. I don't know if you know their work. In their view, the stake of most civil wars is control of the state and its political resources. And in this respect, the dynamics of the Syrian conflict, and in particular the strategy of Bashar al-Assad's regime to control, to keep hold of the country, even if the country is now turned into a pile of rubble, is really convergent with their analysis that survival of an actor in the long term implies the control or the neutralization of the political center, which in turn implies the elimination or the integration of its competitors. This is to quote the work of Bagzo and Doronzo. Meaning, you know, here's the strategy of neutralization that goes, that is put in motion by destruction is quite clear, I think, in the Syrian case. So for the moment, we are in this kind of negative peace. The regime has no interest in engaging into the UN-led process, into accepting the UN resolutions that are framing a political resolution of the conflict. So it means that reconstruction, there is a lot of talk on reconstruction, I'm sure you've heard of it, is also nowhere in sight, because for genuine encompassing reconstruction of Syria, it would require billions and hundreds of billions, and neither Iran nor Russia nor, of course, Syria has the first penny to put euro to put into reconstruction. And the international community, donors, etc., are not going to fund reconstructions that would occur outside UN-led process. So this is where I mentioned earlier in my talks that the fate of the refugees in the Middle East is probably to endure, and the presence of Syrian refugees in the region to become an enduring feature. Although there is a lot of talk in the countries in the region for the return of the refugees, but the refugees are not willing to return into Al-Assad Syria. And these questions, of course, the slogan of Al-Assad Lil Abad, which is Al-Assad for eternity, that was one of the main slogans in pre-war Syria, and that is coming back now. I'm not sure that Al-Assad is there for eternity. One can see the fragility of the regime right now, and so one has to be careful when assessing, you know, this victory of Al-Assad, who reigns now over a country that is completely dysfunctional, a state that's not working anymore, a country where the population is 85% of the population lives under the poverty line, and where reconstruction is, of course, needed, but that is not going to to happen, leaving the country in a situation of possible instability for the years to come. Thank you very much. I think that I overstepped my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. And I certainly look forward to reading your book, which sounds really fascinating. So I'd like to open the floor. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function. We already have one comment, anonymous attendee. And the comment basically says, dates are important. At what point did the internal revolution start to militarize and was combined with external interference? And I just add to that a question I had, and then you may just choose and pick or answer both questions. You mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned the economy of violence, and I thought that was a very interesting concept. And I was just wondering whether you could say a few more words about that. So please, the floor is open. Type your questions into the Q&A. Don't be shy. Go on. Yes, please.
So dates are important, yes. So it's but I'm not sure that I will be able to satisfy if you are hungry for precise dates. So because I showed you this map of Syria where you see the spread of the uprising, and so actually the militarization of the opposition had a different dynamics in many neighborhoods, villages, little cities, big cities. It just started by people taking the arms to protect the demonstrations, because there were also snipers from the regime, etc. So it's difficult to know exactly where this kind of incremental militarization started. Then in the summer 2011, former officers of the Syrian army joined the opposition and created the Free Syrian Army. I'm sure you heard of it. And so this structure developed as the armed branch of what had the ambition to be the political representation of the opposition outside of Syria. And so the Free Syrian Army, if you want really a date, so it's the summer 2011, but it has always been a quite loose network. It's not like an army with a very hierarchized chain of commands and units and funding, etc. And then progressively, from the fall 2011 and to 2012, you've got this movement of militarization, but it is not homogeneous, in the space, in Syria. It has different geographies according to where you are, the context, etc. But it is over this period of the second half of 2011 and then 2012, where really the main dynamics, it's a dynamics of militarized conflict, but still there are still a lot of Pacific demonstration. So in my book, I show that Pacific demonstrations are extremely important up to 2013. So you've got those overlaps, and there are still people who demonstrate and act pacifically in Syria currently. So. I hope I answered your question. The economy of violence, yes, I think it's really, there is an organization of violence, a structure of violence. It's not random, and it's rooted both in different actors actually. So I'm a geographer. I'm not a political analyst, but a political scientist. But there is a connection between between the economy of war, that is a part of this organization of violence that brings benefits to many different actors, and there is a real strategy where violence is really at the heart of a strategy that is not only not only military, aiming at military gain, but that is also political and also economical, to say it very quickly. I cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
There is another question from Niklas Wolfram, who writes, "Thank you very much for the interesting talk. From which funds is the Assad regime currently running the country? And do you see a realistic option how the reconstruction could be funded with the regime still in place?"
So thank you, Niklas. Actually, the problem of the Al-Assad regime is that it's running out of funds currently. And you may have heard that the Syrian pound is in completely free fall. The coffers are empty. And so it's not only, this is what I wanted to touch upon quickly in my conclusion, is that, it's not enough now to have won the military war, although it's not completely done. It's also important to try to win the peace, or not the peace, but and not even the post-conflict, but the current situation, including providing food to people. There is shortages in all the basic goods, in bread, etc. So the problem. So Iran has provided many funding lines to the regime, either in aid or in gifts, but it's limited, and the current situation. And so it's mostly the regime itself is mostly funded by the tycoons, and so the regime is more and more dependent on the big tycoons that are supporting it, and in exchange of their support, it gives to all those big businessmen that sometimes have a foot also outside Syria, but that are mostly Syrians. The regime retributes their support by giving them land, access to land, which is a very important dimension of the conflict, is the transfer of land into private hands, and also increasing mechanisms that already existed before the war, which is giving access to public procurement, etc., to the. So it's the regime is really relying more and more on a very, very narrow basis in order to fund its war effort. But and Russia is not a rich country, as you know. Russia does not provide financial support, so it's just Iran who, from time to time, gives. Provides aid or loans, but in a more and more limited fashion right now. And so I don't see it as a realistic option that the reconstruction could be funded with the regime still in place, because the reconstruction, an ambitious reconstruction, would require, as I said, hundreds of billions of funds, and that would require the international community, the aid agencies, the donors to step in, the international donors to step in, and that would not happen unless, you know, there is a revolution within the international community, but that would probably be the end of international law and justice and whatever. It would require to accept that the conflict would not be settled, and would not be settled within the framework of the UN resolutions that have been passed, and an encompassing peace, etc., and transitional justice mechanism, because war crimes are just so abundant in Syria, etc., etc. So I cannot see a reconstruction, a real reconstruction, an ambitious reconstruction. Then there will be an incremental reconstruction, you know, with and here's the role of the diaspora is extremely important, because Syria survives because of this diaspora, so important, and that sends hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the country every day. And so it's going to happen like that, more likely, you know, because Syria did not have any kind of real diaspora before the war, and now there is this diaspora that changes the dynamics economically for the people inside, and who knows, politically, for the years to come and the resolution of the conflict.
Yes,
I cannot hear you, Rafael.
I always forget to unmute me, sorry, but I'm back. We have two more questions directly related to the reconstruction, and actually one question that was before that from our colleague, Professor Jacqueline Mazin, who is a specialist in Latin America. And so she writes, many comparisons are made to Venezuela, who is the world's worst migrant crisis, Syria for the percent of population affected, and Venezuela for the absolute volume of migrants over 6 million. As Europe's Syrian migrant crisis was at its height in 2014-2015, is there reduced pressure internationally and in Europe now to address the migrant crisis, since the worst has already happened in terms of outflows?
So, you know, in terms of comparisons, I think that Syria is still topping all the other migrant percentage, although I don't know the percentage for Venezuela, the population, but at least in absolute volume. As I said, you know, if you take the unregistered Syrian migrants, it's 7 to 8 million refugees outside, so it's possibly, I think, still the top. But it depends. We'll look at official numbers. Then, you know, the pressure on Europe is still very high. It's coming back quite often. You know, it's because of the key role of Turkey, and here it's the cards that Turkey plays regularly in waiving the possibility of pushing the Syrians outside. So, of course, as you know, there is an agreement with Russia, with Turkey and the EU, and the funding of 3 billion euros for in order to help Turkey to etc. etc. But actually, politically, the threat and the pressure, it's more political pressure that is played with by Turkey. But actually, to let Syrians through its borders. I don't think that anyway, even if the borders were open, that there would necessarily be a rush, because a lot of Syrians have settled in Turkey, and Turkey has also opened a route to the possibility to get naturalized, to get the citizenship, the Turkish citizenship, although it's in small numbers. But of course, a lot of people would probably would like to join family in Europe. But so the political pressure is still there because it's one of the cards that is used by Erdogan in its relationship with Europe.
Mm-hmm. So two more questions. I'm not sure the questions are from the same person because it's anonymous attendee, but that goes back to reconstruction. Do you think that the EU's position not to help reconstruction until Assad departs is correct? Would this contribute to strengthening and unifying the opposition? And a question related to that, I believe is from the same person, is do you think impunity is part of the problem?
Yeah, so I think that it's the only position that the EU can have, because if one, you may have heard that. Was it yesterday or was it last week? I don't remember suddenly. There's been this process trial that has been held in Koblenz in Germany, and an officer of lower rank of the carceral system and the security apparatus, the Syrian security apparatus, so from the regime, has been convinced of, has been trialed, and he got, I think, maybe 4 years of imprisonment because he has been convinced to have been responsible for the arrest of 30 demonstrators in 2011 in Douma, which is near Damascus. And there's another trial linked to this trial still in Koblenz, also in Koblenz, but for a higher ranking officer that is going also to deliver its verdict soon. And there are several trials that are being prepared in Europe. You know that there is no possibility of international justice and international tribunal in Syria because Syria is not part to the convention for international tribunals. But so what happens is that there are all those trials that are set by Syrians, and it's the procedure is that every country has got its oh God, I forgot the juridical term, but can be seized for crimes that are of such scope that even a national judiciary system can judge and be seized for crimes that have been made in another country when those crimes are such that they hurt the human conscience. I think I think this is the phrasing of this procedure. And yes, of course, there are not only it's important for the international juridical system, and that the international community tried to set up after the Second World War, and is trying to develop to have a mechanism of justice, and it's important that and so so there is an issue of impunity because there are so much war crimes that happened in Syria, and it's important to have procedures for a fair settlement of conflicts, and so the UN set up this framework in one of its resolutions in 2015, and so it would be it's important, to try to have not to have a political solution, a political resolution, transitional justice mechanism, etc., to set a real peace, and not just to abide by the rule of the winner. I think.
Okay, I think I will abuse my position and just ask perhaps the last question. And that is, so since we were talking about this reconfiguration of Syria in the framework, I mean, as a consequence of the war, will there be major, or have there already been major demographic changes in terms of the composition of the population, majority relations in specific cities, in Damascus, for example? I'm just curious about that.
So the thing is that, you know, the opposition, so when you look at, maybe I'm clear opposition areas that have been bombed, obviously, are emptied of their population, and this population settled somewhere else in Syria, but most of the refugee population that is outside Syria comes from those neighborhoods and cities, from this opposition held from this Syria that was held by the opposition. It doesn't mean that all the Syrian refugees are in the opposition, but they are from those areas. So as you know, most of the population in Syria was Sunni. So it's mostly the Sunni population that is outside, although there are some Alawites, there are some Christians, etc., that were from these areas or that were from the opposition, etc. But it is mostly in confessional terms, it's mostly this Sunni population that is outside Syria. So yes, in terms of demographic reconfiguration, what happens, what is, rather than demographic re-engineering, because it's this population that has left, is what we see is that these neighborhoods are currently, has been a frenzy of legal activity in order to pass laws, in order to transfer this urban land, suburban lands, etc., to transfer them into private hands, actually, to transfer them into holdings that are actually in which private investors can have the majority shares. So it means that, you know, all those areas that were are actually being are not redeveloped yet, because there is not the first penny for that, but are actually the property of those houses, neighborhoods, etc., is taken off the hands of their former owners. And so this population is mostly outside, some of it is inside, but this is where you can see actually the re-engineering of the population it's in depriving the former population of their ownership and of the possibility of returning. And here it's a massive transformation, and it's a massive process that you can see everywhere in Syria. And this is where also, you know, the destruction, the strategy of destruction is really preparing the ground for a political transformation and a demographic transformation of the country.
Well, always, as I always used to say, you can almost end almost every lecture on the Middle East with the words "on this happy note," right? Thank you, Leila, very much. I think we have to come to a close, and I would really like to thank you for a fascinating presentation. I very much look forward to reading the book, which has a great cover, but I think that the content will be even much better, right? And thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you again. I mean, if you were here, we would clap hands, but perhaps we can do that anyway. I will do it. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafaela. Thank you to everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.